The beautiful music you hear on the podcast this season was composed and performed by Dr. Timo Vollbrecht. He is the Director of Jazz Studies at Brown University. He communicates a moody, evocative sound through his tenor saxophone. But more than a musician, Timo views himself as citizen artist. His work doesn't exist for its own sake. As Timo says, he wants to make music that is for people, that moves people, that might inspire people. He sees his craft of being a musician as putting citizenship into action around social justice and activism. There is what he calls an inevitable social compact that is created between artist and listener. Hello, and welcome to At the Podium with me, Patrick Huey. At the Podium is a multimedia platform that brings together people from a diverse background of lives, careers, and experiences who all share one thing in common. They have stepped fully into the transformative power of finding and raising their voices to make an impact on our world today. At the Podium holds a space for everyone to share their stories, to be heard, and to bring us inspiration. Today, I'm thrilled to share the podium with Dr. Timo Vollbrecht. Timo Vollbrecht is an internationally performing saxophonist, bandleader, composer, reeds player, educator, and scholar. Described as luminously fine by the New York City Jazz Record, his music is blessed with rhythmic fluidity and intricate twists. Based in between his home in Lower Saxony, Berlin, and New York, he is particularly active in the international jazz and contemporary music scenes. He has appeared on 22 albums and at landmark venues such as the Village Vanguard, Berliner Philharmonie, and Jazz at Lincoln Center. He holds a PhD in jazz studies from NYU, where he also taught as an adjunct professor. As a Fulbright scholar, he also holds a master's degree in jazz saxophone from NYU and a bachelor in music education from Berlin University of the Arts. His latest records, Fly Magic and Faces and Places, have gained international acclaim and were featured as Jazz Album of the Week on NDR Radio, as well as on some of the most influential online playlists, including Spotify's State of Jazz. Timo identifies as a citizen artist whose goal is to create music that is situated in cultural context, his immediate life world, and that can powerfully impact people's lives and contribute to their well-being. Before we hear from Timo today, I want to invite you to share at the podium with the people in your lives. If you find our conversation today helpful, and I trust that you will, take a screenshot and share on your Instagram and tag at the podium _Patrick Huey. Or if you're on LinkedIn or Facebook, share our links there. Your shares, likes, and 5-star written reviews help grow our audience and move us up the charts. I'm grateful for your support in this capacity. Okay, Timo, welcome to At the Podium.
Thank you, Patrick. It's an honor to be included on this platform.
I am so glad that we were able to make this happen because actually you are in Hanover, Germany right now.
Correct. Yes, very far away. We have a 9-hour time difference?
I think it's 9.
Yeah.
So I was doing a little research on you, and there's a great quote about you in the Washington Square News. And it says of your playing, it says, Timo Vollbrecht produces art that is situated in cultural context and that is in direct relevance to the environment that surrounds him. He's painting musical portraits of humanity.
That is a nice quote.
It is. Do you think that this is an accurate description of what music is for you? Because I've heard and seen you play, and it is much deeper than just someone playing notes. I mean, it's special. And I remember coming to New York and watching you play in your apartment, and it was something to experience just from a person listening and sitting that close to you playing. But it was also watching you interact with the music that was really impactful.
You know, I grew up in Germany, so here we have a very deeply embedded classical music tradition. Bach, Beethoven, Mozart, all these people, fantastic, beautiful music, obviously. The way we grow up in the West, being educated in music, is a lot of times very focused on the intrinsic elements of music. So notes, harmony. You talk about what's inside the music, right? Like the parameters that make music. And we are so concentrated on that a lot of times we kind of forget the context that evolves around music. And that is something that over time it is there, like it is inevitably there, but it depends on where you shift your focus to. So the longer I've been doing this, the more apparent it is to me that it is a social art in its essence. Music is. I try to highlight that, and it might sound a little abstract because I'm a saxophone player. I don't use lyrics. I don't use words. Like when you do that, you can do it very directly. But I firmly believe that all of these things, emotions, relationships, your everyday experiences are not just extra musical, but they're actually intrinsic in the music. They're part of the DNA. Yeah, it's a little hard to describe in words how that comes out, but I do feel that I think that's the place that I make music from, and the musicians that inspire me are not just musicians whose music inspired me, but who inspire me as human beings. Yeah.
In your bio, you talk about artistic citizenship.
That is closely linked to that. That's basically the consequence of what I just described, because once you realize that music making and art in general is a social praxis, then you can use it for a social good. And artistic citizenship or musical citizenship, in my understanding, is that I don't want to make music for a vacuum. I want to make music that is for people and that moves people, that might inspire people. You can use it for also social justice, activism, but not just that. You can just, the question is, how do you use your music? So just to give an example, I don't need to exclusively play for like a big concert hall where, you have all this, like the lights shine in your eyes, you don't see the audience. I equally enjoy playing in an old people's home, for example, or I played concerts at this refugee center in Germany a few times. And those are also, like to choose to also play in those places and interact with people through your music that's something that I think is important. So that is my understanding. Like basically it's the understanding that I'm not just a musician, I'm a citizen and I have responsibilities as a citizen. And since I happen to be a musician, I want to use that craft to put that to work.
So you're saying that within the context of music, within the context of creating of art, that there is a social compact that's happening, and that there is
it's inevitable.
Right, and there's a context.
Yes.
If you look at Nina Simone, her music took on a social context in the 1960s, where before she was almost strictly a jazz singer, and then she became the voice of the civil rights movement. So she really was able to place her music within the context of what you would call the real life.
Mm-hmm. Yes, I mean, Simone is a perfect example of that. Billie Holiday, Max Roach, Charles Mingus. Absolutely, I think that's a great example.
You kind of said it very succinctly that the piece that's different for you is that you don't have lyrics. So, which gives it a different kind of dynamic because you're dealing with, it's almost like listening to opera if it's not in the language that you speak.
Absolutely. It's an embodied experience, right? So it's, I don't convey information through lyrics. So it is not pinpointed. It's more abstract. So a listener might have a very different associations and connotations to what I do, and that's totally fine, But the listener and I, or my band, we meet and we spend time together. And the question is, where do we do that? How do we do that? Do I, as a musician, recognize the power in that or not? Or am I the lofty artist who doesn't care if there's an audience or not? Because I care. I really care, You
said something really profound in that there's the art that you make, and and then there's the art that is received, which there can sometimes be a difference between that. Like what you create may not be what is felt or what is experienced by the person who's listening to you.
Absolutely. Yeah. But that's the nature of any kind of music, I think, and that's the beauty about art. Like you, as the recipient, you connect it to your own life world, and it becomes very personal. It becomes very deep, or it can at least, so, and that's so precious. That's why, we as jazz musicians, we don't always play in front of 10,000 people. I mean, we rarely do. We sometimes, I mean, I've had this experience of playing for one person or three, but it can be an equally amazing experience because of that, because as long as you touch one person's life, I mean, that's the best job in the world, I think.
Yeah. It's so funny you say that, because there was a time as a jazz musician when you would have played in front of stadiums of people.
Right.
Ken Burns did a great documentary on the history of jazz. I don't know if you've ever seen it, but it's a pretty...
Yeah, I did. He did, yeah.
Spectacular. And you look at people like Louis Armstrong and Benny Goodman and Duke Ellington, these great jazz musicians who were really... They weren't just filling stadiums, they were literally creating a social movement around music, and they were really influencing, I guess, in the way that rappers do today, really sort of drive the social conversation. There was a moment in time when jazz was that thing, when it was in the reaction to ragtime and all of that kind of stuff. So I think it's interesting.
Absolutely. I mean, it used to be the pop music of that time. It was the jazz era, and it came out of African American culture. It's so funny because it was white people who initially wrote about the music, scholars or wannabe scholars, and it was distributed in the world from this very white lens and exoticized a lot of times. That was one of the appeals, right? It's like, oh, this exotic music from the African American community, but it'd be like people didn't realize it came from mainstream culture, African American mainstream culture, and it came out of that organically and was so powerful. So it was a very human music from the beginning, and it was so strong, and it mesmerized the world, and it had a huge impact.
You could say it's probably one of the original American music forms.
Absolutely, yes.
There's this amazing video of you on Instagram. I think you were probably 6 years old.
And I know which one you're talking about.
You know which one I'm talking about. And you're playing this silver toy alto saxophone. You're playing I think the song is called Step Ahead. As you're playing with it. You're not playing with it, you're pretending to play with it. But there was something about that video, Timo. You were like in the pocket with that song, and you were dancing, and you were pretending to finger the notes on the saxophone. And I thought, when I was watching it, I thought, is that where it started for you?
Absolutely. I mean, also, you didn't mention my style, because I think my clothes were really...
Well, I mean, you had on a nice little vest-looking thing and some, like, joggers, it looked like. It was pretty...
It was very 90s. It was very 90s. That's exactly where it started, because a friend of my father's gave me a toy saxophone, and my parents are not musicians, but they're music lovers, and my mom is a dancer. I mean, they're both high school teachers, now retired. But my mom was really into dance, and she taught dance at the high school. And my dad, he's a physics and chemistry teacher, but he was really into music. So he built his own speakers, and he had a lot of music, and we were listening to... I just had the luxury and privilege to grow up with high quality music. And he was listening to jazz, among other things. And for some reason, that was the music that I was really drawn to. And then I had this toy saxophone, and I just pretended to be jamming to these CDs back in the days. I just remember when, some of my elementary school friends were starting to take music lessons. I kind of wanted to do that too. And I really wanted to do, and the closest instrument that I could think of was the saxophone, but also at the same time, I wanted to actually really play to those CDs. And that's how I started. And I just remember one thing that I will never forget that blew my mind was that my father one day took me aside and said, you know what? These people on these records, they improvise. And I didn't know what that meant. And I had just started music lessons, and you know, it's the typical thing. You learn how to read music and notation and all that kind of stuff. And I said, what does that mean? And he said, well, they play without sheet music. They make it up. They invent the music in the moment. And I just could not believe that that is possible, But at the same time, I was actually already doing it in a way. So my first steps as a jazz musician was playing to these CDs without knowing any harmony or anything, just like trying to jam with it. So, yeah.
I play instruments too, and that's kind of how we connected. But that improvisational piece is the piece that makes me sweat because I learned to read music. And so that was the foundation of me learning how to play the piano, the saxophone, and the guitar. So I have a hard time breaking away from that. And I know a lot of our conversations and when you were working with me was about how to move past just the notes and move into. And I think part of it, one thing you said to me, which I thought was really profound, was that it's okay if you make a mistake, because when you are actually learning music, it's all about the precision of playing the notes in the time, in the rhythm that they're written. But a lot of improvisation is, I don't say throwing that away because everything is cumulative and everything is present within you. But there's a certain, I think it's a mindset. Am I right or wrong in that you can improvise so fluidly?
In a way, when we are musically trained, for some reason, we kind of are blocked off from improvisation. But there's something that's really interesting that you said that, no, I forgot what I said. I said it's okay to make a mistake. Is that what I said?
Yes.
The interesting thing about that is that the concept of what a mistake is changes. Of course, when you have like a piece of sheet music and work by a composer, and that composer wants you to do something a certain way, and you don't hit a note right, that is considered a mistake, right? Makes sense. But in other contexts, that doesn't mean to be a mistake. Like compared to a conversation like we're just having, just because I don't say a word that was prescribed doesn't mean that it's wrong. I can say a word, I don't know, tree, which is something that's right behind me. It makes sense because it's right behind me, and we can, we don't have to, but we could start talking about apple trees and how they're actually, these apples right here in this garden are apples that are not being sold in the store because they don't fit Gala and Fuji and all these things. Like they're the most delicious apples that you can imagine. That, for example, like we just went into like an improvisatory, or I did, improvisatory setting. Same with music. One thing that for me, it's so interesting because I totally know what you're talking about, because that was my reaction to my father when he told me about improvised music, and I was so blown away by that concept because just as you were just describing, I just couldn't imagine it. But I had another pivotal moment in my teenage years because I started on classical piano, and the music school that I went to had these big recitals. Like they rented a huge room. I don't even know how many people. And I was also small, so I might be exaggerating, but it felt like 600 people. It was just like this big old Baroque hall that it was filled with parents, because they had a lot of students, and they had this like recital. And I just remember I played this I think it was some Bach piece. It was very hard, and you're supposed to play it memorized, and I did it very well at home, practicing on, in my own comfort zone. But once all of a sudden I'm like stage light and all these people are watching, I just remember how I at some point forgot how it went, and that would have never happened at home. So I just remember I got and my fingers were moving the way they were moving, and I just got really nervous. And then kind of at the same time, I'll start getting into jazz. And for some reason, this pressure got taken away because I was allowed to make mistakes. Just because one of the things when you improvise, when you don't know what to do, you can just stop playing. It's fine, So for some reason, it gave me a lot of freedom, and it took that nervousness away. And I just knew that's where I have to go. So yeah, I kind of became a jazz musician because I couldn't hang with the classical music.
You kind of alluded to it in your response just now. There's a special kind of bravery that one has to have to play music, to walk onto a stage, because you can't hide when you're playing an instrument. You can't hide when you're singing. There's something about the musical expression of art that doesn't allow much subterfuge. You're out there. People they're live, they're listening. And I don't think I'm overstating it when I say that that's a brave act to do that. I think it's a brave act to engage in any artistic endeavor that exposes you to criticism, to praise, to failure.
Right.
And I wonder where that kind of bravery comes from within you.
I like that you use that word because I don't think I've encountered it in that sense. Yeah, I guess in a way it's true. There is but there's all this. There's bravery in the hidden as well. Like you can be brave being a musician, and you can also be not brave. If you hide behind what you practice, that might not be as brave as to be open, to be vulnerable musically and on stage. So I guess there's a spectrum within that. I don't really know where it comes from, to be honest. I mean, it's maybe a little bit experience over the years of I was lucky enough to start this kind of early or early-ish at least. I think that I had a really good support system. My family was always very supportive. I mentioned that my parents were both high school teachers, and they were very adamant about being active in extracurricular. So, and I was privileged enough to be at a school where we had a jazz band and a not an orchestra, but like a wind ensemble and the theater. So I had all these experiences early on to be on stage. Kind of have to put yourself out there. So I think it just came over time. Yeah, I don't know. It's a good question. I might have to think a little more about it, but I just like that you call it brave.
As we were talking, Mozart came to mind because, and this is the question I wanted to ask you about the tension between the academy and perhaps the necessariness of an academy, and then the idea of moving past the academy to innovation and redefinition. But you look at, I think Mozart is the embodiment of that, because if you look at Mozart, he was breaking all of the rules when he was creating. And now we look back at that today from 2022, and that is considered the academy.
I know what you mean. Same with jazz. I mean, jazz used to be during the bebop era and all these like people that we still admire, Parker, Thelonious Monk, Duke Ellington, Mary Lou Williams. They were all people who were so on the edge of on the forefront of this new music that now they're being treated as, maybe a bad word, but kind of like treated as these masters of tradition who we have to study. So I know what you mean. There is obviously a big debate about whether the academy curtails innovation. And in many cases, it unfortunately does. But I also think, first of all, it doesn't always, and it doesn't have to at all. And it has to do with several things. So I think that, first of all, there is a myth about art. And it is that it is this, you need to be a genius and it just comes from the sky. And all of a sudden you have this idea and you are so talented and then you can do it. That is not true. There's a lot of training in that. Of course, there's some people, for some reason, have it a little easier with certain things, but it really is training and it's preparation. Where do you learn that? I mean, there are many ways to learn that, but you need a good teacher. You need a good surrounding and a good environment. If an academy is able to give you that, it's perfect. But like in my case, I really learned a lot from going to music school. The best thing was that I met a lot of people who were doing the same thing. And one of the cool things about going to New York at some point in my career was they were not just doing the same thing, but they were coming from all kinds of places, all walks of life, different cultures. So going to New York was great because all of a sudden I was in this extremely diverse pool. So it was like this intersection of ideas where people from different walks of life come and exchange ideas. That happened at the academy for me. It doesn't have to. I mean, that's not the only place where you can learn. I do think that if you can be connected to a good mentor or to several, to a good environment, a good supportive student environment, to be able to play with people who are better than you or further advanced, that's just and maybe be able to, work interdisciplinarily. Those are the best things you can do. And if an academy is able to provide you with that, it's fantastic. Now, we have to be careful because sometimes certain outside forces like, there's a certain curriculum requirement can be hurtful. And for some people, it just isn't the right place. Obviously, as you know, I am also in academia. So I really don't think, and in my work, I try not to be academy a thing that hinders you. in your way forward, but in something that really supports you. And I'm confident and actually 100% positive that it can, if it's done correctly. Mm.
There's a value in the structure that you get within an academy or whatever that thing may be that allows you to be in relationship to something as you innovate and change. Otherwise, it's chaos, I would imagine.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. A structure is definitely good. Yeah, for sure. That's why I think studying with a teacher is great, because you can work out a structure together with a teacher.
This kind of relates to what we were talking about before, but I feel like saxophone is really defined by people like Charlie Parker and John Coltrane and Coleman Hawkins and Sonny Rollins. Mm-hmm. And I wonder, I asked this question because there was a great interview with George Bush II, the second president, and he was saying that as a president, he had to get right with Lincoln in terms of what a presidential person looked like and did and how they comported themselves and what they achieved. And I mentioned Coltrane and Hawkins and Rollins and Parker because I wonder if for you as a professional sax player, as a teacher, if you have to get right with those types of players to find your voice, or is there no relation whatsoever? Because these are legacy players who really defined what it means to play that instrument in the way that Callas defined what it meant to be an opera singer.
Yeah, of course. Yes. What did you use, the expression you used to get it right with it? No, what was the...
George Bush said, you have to get right with these presidents.
You have to get right. You have to get right. I mean, I can't get right with these people. I mean, they're just, my first love was Sonny Rollins. I really fell in love with Sonny Rollins. And then I got really into Coltrane, Wayne Shorter, people like Stan Getz and Lester Young, Hawk. And of course, I'm so grateful that they, created this music and really took the sax to that level, because they are great teachers. The recordings have been my best teachers and great sources of inspiration. I learned by imitating them, but of course I cannot be them, So the question is, what do you do with that, right? So first of all, I feel extremely privileged to be able to partake in the lineage that comes out of that. And I think I'm very aware of that lineage. On the other hand, the question is, what are the lessons that you take with you? And one, I think, is that of originality. And that's a big buzzword, of course. But to have the courage, and I guess there we're back at bravery, to find your own path. In my case, I think that one of the things that I needed courage to do is to, like, when you go to jazz school, you learn about harmony, and there are all these players that really extended the harmony and were, extremely virtuosic. I needed a little bit of courage to say, you know what, I'm actually going to write songs that have very simple chord structures and that maybe have a very simple melody, and look for simplicity in a lot of that. And that was something that was, out of the study of this music, because you go for all these complex structures, needed a little bit of bravery. But in a way, I was just like, but that's what I like in that moment. And that was something that I took from these masters, where I was like, well, they did exactly what they thought was best and what they wanted and what their individuality was telling them. So I guess that's a lesson. But it's not that the weight of these masters prevent me from playing the saxophone. That's not the case.
And I think about Callas in particular because, she's been dead since the 1970s. She was born over 100 years ago. And to this day, people still, when Apple came out with their big Think Different campaign back in the 90s, they used her picture. That's how much of a social impact that she had made. I think it's interesting as an artist, as anyone trying to achieve in a field that has been so defined by somebody, how you reckon with just the legacy, just the impact that these great performers, great thinkers have. I think it's an interesting relationship because it ties back to this idea of academy and structure, and then how to innovate for the future, bearing in mind all that did come before.
I think there are two things to that. One is that, of course, they're like these people that really did amazing things because they changed a genre. They had a huge impact on the music. But also, a lot of times we put them on a pedestal in a way that sometimes is a little weird, because it's also, a lot of times there are people that were right next to them or right behind them who did equally amazing things, and for some reason they didn't find their place in history, but they're also worth being checked out. And at the same time, these people are not holy people. They had their flaws and their temper, and they couldn't play a certain thing very well, but they did something else very well. So I think that you got to be a little bit careful, because that's like it's canonized a lot of times in history, and we all have to love Coltrane. What if you don't? That's fine. Maybe you're into something else, and that's totally cool. Yeah.
You say that your music exists within a cultural and a social context. And I wonder, how has the rise of movements like the Me Too movement, Black Lives Matter, and other political and social movements impacted the world of jazz, and how you approach your work?
I think, first of all, I do think that my music is situated in cultural context, because I think that every music is. And I think with these movements, these recent movements like Me Too and the BLM movement, I think they serve as a great reminder that, jazz in particular has always been a very activist music in a way. I mean, and you mentioned Nina Simone. I think I mentioned Billie Holiday. I mean, think of Strange Fruit, or Max Roach's Freedom Now Suite, Minx's Fables of Faubus. Those are very, expressively political pieces. And then I guess, coming back to this topic of the academy, in a way, people started studying that type of music, and a lot of time it was removed from the social context in the way it was taught, because it was taught the way that classical music was being taught a lot of times. So you look at the elements, you transcribe a solo, and you try to learn the language, which is great stuff, obviously. But a lot of us kind of forgot that there's like all this like shadow behind it, if you want to call it a shadow, like the layers of context.
Yes.
I do think that they serve as great reminders, and there are a lot of people around me in my community that do a lot of very openly political music. But I also don't think that it has to be so openly political. It can be just just expressing everyday life, that when you're true to yourself and true to the world around you, is also that. But it also has very, especially these movements around diversity have had very cool impacts. There's a big pull toward increasing visibility to historically underrepresented groups in jazz. Jazz has been a very male dominated music. It still is. There's a big push toward getting more female players involved and shown. Still a lot of work to be done in all of these areas, but it has started. So I do think that these movements have also touched upon this community in a good way, I hope.
Time will tell, right?
Time will tell. Yes, time will tell.
So you have played across the world. You've played on 5 continents. So I guess you haven't played in Antarctica.
No, I haven't.
I don't know if there's any jazz bars in Antarctica. Have you played in Africa?
No, I have not. I would love to play in Africa.
I wonder what you've learned about people, the world, yourself, and just the amount of travel and the amount of exposure that you've had in these really diverse, different places.
Traveling, it has such potential for growth. The cool thing is that when you travel with music, it is very easy to get in touch with people on a personal level. Like we've done a lot of workshops. We typically do not just concerts, but also workshops. So I don't know. I was in Haiti doing like workshop with like kids who played instruments. I did this really cool one event in Ramallah in Palestine, where we put this open music night together. I did a thing in Cambodia with Khmer musicians, like a collaborative project, and you learn so much from, for example, like culturally, in terms of like other musical traditions that really you inspire one another. But also, I think the thing that you really start to realize that, man, we're all just people, so it's so interesting. Like you grow up and in a place and people talk about nations and like what country are you from? And I feel so much more connected to certain people from other countries than from with certain people in my own country, which I have a German passport, so I'm German. I'm a lot more closely connected with certain people from Senegal or Haiti than I am with certain people here. So you start to question like the categories that we use a lot of times, and that's definitely something that I learned. You learn about your own privilege. I mean, I'm a white male, so that's something that you start thinking about it, hopefully, when you immerse yourself in different places. And you don't have to leave your country for that, but it highlights, it highlights certain things.
If you look at what jazz was doing in the 1920s and teens, when it was really sort of, bringing Black and white kids together to dance together, which is a huge social disruptive act, but they didn't think about it because they were coming together around the music. It's almost like musicians are these sort of quiet, social, maybe not sometimes so quiet, social revolutionaries.
Playing music with the other gives a face and a humanness and like an emotional aspect to the other. And all of a sudden they stop being the other, so that's why I think it's a very powerful tool to bring people together. Yeah.
So you've had two really big shifts this year. You and your wife became parents.
We did, yes.
And now you are the head of jazz studies in the music department at Brown University. What does all that mean for you?
Wow. How can I respond to that question? I mean, especially the kid thing is such a immensely deep and intense experience that I don't think I can tell you what that means just yet, but it's great. And I'm also very excited about this new challenge at Brown University. Yeah, I'm very excited about joining the faculty, and I will try to, bring my practice-based experience as a practicing musician into the academy. Yes. And yeah, try to do good as much as I can. And balance these two things, of having a family and being an active musician, composer, and also a teacher and director of jazz studies. So yeah, it's a lot of great things, and it's a big life change. So, but I love change, so I really embrace it, and it's really good change. So,
well, I mean, it's great change. What step in your life this far, and there may be more than one, have been your greatest leaps of faith?
I think that staying in New York was my biggest leap of faith so far, or one of the bigger ones. The reason for that is because, well, first of all, I was away from home, right? I thought I'd be there for a year. I came on a scholarship to study. It's kind of an easy way to go somewhere, someone's paying for you, and you go into a structure. It's like a structured place. You have a purpose. Staying there was a tougher decision in a place like New York, which is pretty unforgiving and hard as a musician to make a living, and but also it was a like kind of an identity thing that where I really thought I would go back, and then there were always different reasons that kept me in New York, and it took a while to be cool with that for some reason, and it eventually became amazing, but yeah, I think that was a leap of faith for me to kind of trust that it'll be all right. There were so many emotions connected to that. Like I felt like I was letting some people down. I had bands back home in Germany, my family. Yeah.
And now you're a New Yorker or a Rhode Islander.
Yeah. Brooklynite.
Right. On this season of the show, we're talking to people who have found or are finding their voice. And I wonder what that means for you if you have found your voice. And if you have, what are you doing with that power, with that platform?
Well, I think that I continuously strive to find my voice. I don't think that is a process that will ever be finished, and I don't want it to be finished. So I think it's a very active thing. It's an unended process. And that's also how I want to use it. You know, I don't want to fixate my voice to be a certain thing. And I want it to be and I also don't want it to be something that stands alone without others. So to me, what I want to do with my voice is I want to connect it with other people, and with other people together create a communal voice, you know? So as a jazz player, for example, like there's this typical thing of like, oh, I play solo, but even if you play solo, you express individual expression in a group context, in interaction with other people, you know? So there's always, like, as a saxophone player, I don't want to get too technical, but they're like these two poles. Like when you play with a band, you can either play above the band or you can play inside the band, and both has, depending on the situation, its merits. So a lot of times I choose to play within the band, and that's kind of what I also want to do with, you know, I think that's the way I use my voice, or I want to use my voice. Yeah, but it's like, again, long story, like long answer put short, I want to connect my voice to other voices and together do something.
I love that. So you've had two very successful albums, one in 2016 and one in 2018. Mm-hmm. What are you working on right now?
I'm actually working on the third of that. I have my own project. It's called Fly Magic. It's a quartet, sometimes a quintet, but mostly a quartet. And we're putting out an album on October 21st, actually, of this year. And it's called Givers and Takers. And it touches upon the topics that we were actually just discussing, because especially, you know, this is not a pandemic album, no worries. But during the pandemic, I think that the social aspect of music making really came to the forefront of, you know, it's just not the same of like not being in tune with your community and not make music with and for other people. So I wanted to dedicate this album to that. And it's a lot of the music that I wrote during that time. And Givers and Takers on the one hand means the give and take of human relationships. But also it is actually a bar in Brooklyn that my friends and I used to go to a lot to, you know, chat and be together. And so it's this idea of like community and us being together that is part of this album. And yeah,
I love that. Givers and Takers.
Givers and Takers.
21st.
Yep.
All right. Thank you so much, Timo. And
cool,
to
Patrick.
those of you who are watching or listening, remember, we all have a voice. So use yours wisely. Bye, everyone. Thank you, Timo.